As with every new release, I have been inundated with questions about whether people think that they should buy the new Empire Battalion box. And I would say no, I've got 5 boxes for you that I think makes a better core for an Empire army. However, if you have bought it, it's not the end of the world. You absolutely can play around with it. Some of the stuff in there is pretty solid. Some of it's maybe a little bit less good, but you can still tweak it, and everything's cyclical. Things that are good now might not be good in the future. Things that are not as good now will become better, as rules change. That's not something to be too worried about. So let's get into it and start off with the 5 boxes I think you should buy instead of the Battalion box. Full disclaimer, obviously I do work with Element Games. Referral links to all of the products mentioned are in the description down below if you want to buy them. I will get a kickback on anything you purchase through Element using those links. However, it's mostly important that you don't buy retail. If you have the opportunity to do so, buy from a reputable third-party seller. You'll get a discount. It's just a better way to spend your money. Obviously, pennies are tight, so save a little bit, spend it on paints, buy more models, whatever you want to go with. My first recommendation is the ever versatile box of Empire Knights. These are slightly older models, but you get 12 in a box, and they are some of the best core you can run in the Empire army. And that's really where you're going to have to start fleshing out your list. The main problem that Empire has is everything they have is kind of cheap, so if you want to buy an army, you're going to end up potentially buying more models. So what I'm going to try and do is limit it down to just 5 boxes to cover all of your non-character needs. First of all, Empire Knights. You get 12 in a box. This is fantastic. You can very comfortably run them as a big unit of 12. You can run them as 3 units of 4. You could run them as a 4 and an 8. There's a lot of options here. You don't even have to run all of them, but if you're trying to, start the army on a budget, I definitely recommend running all 12. The way that I'd potentially set these up is look at running them as Knights of the White Wolf. If you're playing in Grand Army, which is probably where I'd recommend you start if you're playing Empire, skewing into either of the other detachments is a little bit harder to start with if you want to pick up the army, and you'll have a more fleshed out collection if you start with Grand Army. But if you go with Grand Army, you can have 1 character and 1 unit of knights, or Demogryph Knights or Inner Circle Knights, upgraded to be one of the orders of the knights that are unlocked, usually through the Order of Detachment. Order of the White Wolf is fantastic. They have Wolf Hammers, which is strength +2 on the charge, AP -2, and it also gives them Furious Charge. So it turns those relatively weak, strength 5, AP 2 lances with a single attack into a pretty good combat unit. So I do like a big unit of Knights of the White Wolf. Whether you go 8 of them or if you go for the full 12, either is a good option there. Remember as well, these can be bought some great upgrades. You can give them drilled, you can give them stubborn. If I'm running a big brick of 12, I'm more willing to lean into the drilled. Gives you a little bit more flexibility in your movement. I really like stubborn on all of my knights if I can afford it. 0 to 1 unit per 1,000 points gets stubborn. So if I'm running 0 to 2 units of Empire Knights, probably both of them get stubborn. I feel really good about that. But, feel free to play around. You might find that you don't get much use out of stubborn and you prefer to go with drilled. Your mileage may vary. This box will set you back around £40 if you're buying direct from Games Workshop, or £34 if you're buying from a third party such as Element Games. This is a great rate for 12 knights. Obviously, they are slightly older models. The horses are a little bit stunted, but it is a very good budget option, and it does come with plenty of options. If you do want to run them as Knights of the White Wolf, they do come with a conversion sprue in there as well. You get the nice hammers, the cloaks as well. I think you get some themed heads in there on top of that. But in my opinion, it's a great kit, albeit a bit dated. Next up, we've got a choice. How do you want to fill out the rest of your core? You could go for a second box of knights, but that's not really the sort of vibe we're going for here. We're trying to give you a good balanced core to build around. So in my opinion, you've got 2 choices. Either the State Missile Troops box, which is coming up on pre-order this weekend, or the Empire Archers. And I personally would lean towards Empire Archers. I prefer them. I think they're very good. With the clarification for scouting being, counted towards your go first, go second role, it does take a little bit of the value out of them, but I think they're still very good. Especially if you're running foot wizards, which you might well be, because unfortunately there's not any mounted wizards that you can buy from Games Workshop at this time. You can obviously do some conversions, do some kit bashing, whatever you fancy, but if you're going to use any of the fancy new models that they've released, which they do look fantastic to be fair, you're probably looking at some sort of foot unit of infantry that you want to hide them in, and I think archers work better for that. But, your mileage may vary. State Missile Troops, I think, are probably the better unit, just sort of wholesale. Take them, give them crossbows, stand them back, just have them be effective that way, but go with whichever way you choose. With core taken care of, now we've got to think about what we want to do with our special and rare slots. And there's a lot of fun stuff that you can do. But if you're looking at a sort of points per cost basis, there are some things that, in my opinion, take you in a better direction. And also thematically, I'm talking about war machines. Now, you might not want to go for the full war machine spam, and that's entirely reasonable. But in my mind, the first thing that I would go to is a couple of cannons. These come in a box of 2. You can make the mortars out of them, or you can make the great cannons. Great cannons, as the name might suggest, are pretty great. They come in at £35.50 retail, or if you're going third party, comes in at about £30, just over £30, which gives you 2 cannons, which is about 250 points. By Empire standards, £30 for 250 points, that's pretty incredible. And honestly, by most armies' standards, that's not too bad. So you've got a couple of war machines here, cannons, this gives you some good range punch, it fits in thematically with how Empire play, it's some of the better units in the list, and I think it's a great place to start in terms of filling out your non-core, non-character allotment. In my eyes, to follow that up, there is a pretty pivotal choice in how you want to build your army, and that is, do you want to go for a steam tank, which is incredibly cool, but it's an online-only model, which means that if you buy it from a third party, you're not going to get a discount, so it's coming in a little bit more expensive. Or do you want to go for another unit, for example, a couple of Hellblaster Volleyguns? I think the Hellblaster Volleyguns are a good way to round out the force. You know, we've got some infantry with guns or crossbows or bows. We've got some knights that are going to hit pretty hard. We've got some cannons to deal with big stuff. We've got some Hellblaster Volleyguns to deal with some small stuff. That's sort of the general gist that I'm going with. Again, these come as a box of 2. They're coming in at £35 odd from retail, down to about £30 if you get them from a third party. So you're making some good savings. And again, they're reasonably expensive models. They're 120, 125 points, something along those lines. So you're getting quite good value per point there. And it does round out the army nice and thematically. Obviously, alternate thought, you could go for the steam tank as well. As mentioned, it's a very similar sort of points. It comes in at 275, so it takes up a good chunk of points. It is coming in at more expensively, £47.50, I think it is, with no discount if you buy it third party. So a little bit less of an appealing buy from that perspective. But if part of the reason you love the Empire is the big silly tank running around, then go for it. It's a great model. It's, you know, it looks fantastic. It plays well. It's quite points dense. What's not to love? Finally, if we're looking for something to round out a balanced core, I think I'm looking at fast cavalry. And that's a good thing, because fast cavalry come in a pretty reasonably priced box as far as I'm concerned. We've got the Empire Pistoliers / Outriders box, and that comes in at £40 retail or £34 for a third party. And that does give you 10 models, so you can easily run them as 2 units. How would I run them? Well, I think you could do it a couple of different ways. 2 units of Outriders is very solid. If you want to go for a bit of variety, and I think this is very valid, you could go for a unit of Outriders with a Sergeant, upgraded to have the grenade launching blunderbuss. It's a great model. It's very fun to use. It's just, you know, a solid gun as well. And then also a unit of Road Wardens, which are Empire Pistoliers, but good. You're going to upgrade them to the double pistols, and they've got all of the stuff that Empire Pistoliers have, apart from a better ballistic skill for some reason. And also they don't have Impetuous, which means that they're not going to charge off into a dragon and cause you some real problems that you wanted to avoid. So that's solid, you know. Those 5 boxes take you to about 1,250 points, excluding characters. And given that we're in something of a Hero Hammer edition, you're probably going to want to spend about 750 points in Empire on characters. So what does that get you? Well, 5 boxes, under £175, you've got 1,250 points, and then you can build your characters out, you can tweak from there. And I think that's a really solid base. You can build a fairly competitive list from it, but also I don't think anyone's really going to moan when they see that on the table. You know, you've got a good mix of units, and yes, there's 4 war machines, but it's Empire. You'd probably expect to see some war machines, and there is a bit of variety in there. A couple of Hellstorms, a couple of cannons as well. As for characters, this is where it can get a little bit more pricey. You do have scope to take things a bit more reasonably, especially if you've got access to potentially 3D printed war wagons or something like that. But if you don't, and you just want to sort of go with reasonably points dense without breaking the bank, he would be my recommendation, and then maybe a tweak if you wanted to go a little bit more wild. Starting off with characters. As I said, this is where it can start to get a bit more expensive. Empire characters are famously cheap point per point, but we've got a few different options. So, starting off, I would recommend the Empire General on Imperial Griffon. I think this is a great model. I think it's held up really well. It's reasonably points dense. When you've kitted it out, it's going to be around the 300 points mark. It's coming in at £45 retail, or about £40 if you get it third party, which is, you know, a great setup. And I also think it's good to have in an all-comers list. It's a reasonable threat in melee. Let's be clear, it's not a dragon, but it's still T5. The Griffon itself does some attacks. It's a behemoth, so you get AP on the stomps, which is really solid. And then while the chap on top isn't too good, you can kit it out to give defenses. You can get a good armor save there with the full plate. You can get a ward save there buying Talisman of Protection, or the, you know, the other ward save you can get in the cloak. It also gives you options to take the Dragon Bow, which is a 25-point magic item, which is effectively another war machine. Now, 300 points is quite a high rate for a war machine, but you're not taking it for that. You're just taking the magic item as an addition to what you can already get. So I think that's a really solid buy. And if I'm looking at putting an Empire army together, this is genuinely one of the places that I'd start. You can't put a Grandmaster on there, so you don't get the better combat character, but I think this is a good buy anyway. Next up, let's be honest with each other. Part of the reason you've decided to collect Empire is the 3 new fantastic wizards. And that's super reasonable. I respect that. Obviously, they're an online-only product. Just, you know, you're not going to get a discount picking them up anywhere else, but that's fine. They're amazing. They're an individual infantry model. You're not breaking the bank to pick one of those up, so it's fair play. Also, a level 4 wizard is one of the best ways to spend points. They're relatively points dense for an individual foot character. Obviously, we've decided that we're going to take some foot infantry to give them somewhere to sit. You can go a couple of different ways. One of the best ways to go, in fact, I'd say you could go 3 ways realistically. If you wanted to buff up the knights, for example, you could go dark magic. Maybe you pick up the demonology wizard's familiar combo, where you're getting that +1 spell known and the +1 to cast. This is really strong. You might go illusion. You might try and tool them up to give them defenses, stop you getting charged by dragons, dropping down that miasmic mirage, using, you know, the column of crystal, using miasmic mirage to stop the dragon from charging you. All of these things are great. Or you might want to go for more ranged output, and a battle magic caster is really strong there, going for fireball, going for pillar of flame, arcane urgency on your units to get them where they need to be. All of these things are solid. So I think a level 4 wizard is maybe not a must buy, but I'd recommend it in every army, and especially in Empire. Now, really, if I was going to be putting an Empire list together to play as competitively as possible, I'm probably going to have an Empire wizard either on a horse or on a Pegasus. But those models don't exist in terms of what Games Workshop's put out recently. So, you know, do whatever you fancy. If you want to convert one of those up, amazing. If you want to run the foot character, go for it. They're still pretty good. Just keep in mind that you do have to play a little bit differently. You're not going to be following around your unit of knights and buffing them up turn after turn. So maybe you're looking for something more of like a long-range strategy, like the Battle Magic Caster. But I think that, as I said, they're fantastic models. If you just want to go for one and go with a lore associated with that, more power to you. I think all of the laws are worth taking in some respect for Empire, and most of them have pretty good long-range spells, so it doesn't matter that you're sat at the back of the board for most of the game. Plus, people are going to run towards you. You've got guns. If you're not unbelievably enamored with only running, the new Empire models, you can also pick up the old box, which makes 4 wizards. It's called the Collegiate Arcana Mystic Battle Wizards. Used to be an old world set or a Warhammer Fantasy set. It has since been moved over to Age of Sigmar, but if you can get your hands on it, you can make 4 wizards out of there. And wizards are pretty points dense, so if you want to go cheap, this is a fantastic set to pick up. Element Games do have some still. I'm going to put that in the link. You bet that I have bought a box before recording this video because I absolutely didn't want to put this out and miss out on them. £28 coming from, Element Games. I think it's a direct-only product, but that's fantastic. Next up, we've got Engineers. Now, there is a nice new model that's coming in at the same price as the Wizards, which is a shiny new Engineer. That's lovely. Honestly, you could probably kit bash one up between the missile troops that you've got and then also the spare bits that you've got from the Pistoliers. But if you want to go for buying a new model, go for it. Obviously, direct order only. Doesn't really matter where you pick that one up for, but it is lovely. If you're playing Empire, you might want to run a couple of these. I would recommend leaving them relatively bare bones. Taking, a 10-point gun on them isn't the end of the world, but I'd rather keep them cheaper in general, because the main job that they have is to buff up the war machines and the other shooting units that you have. So don't go too crazy on those. Just bring them as sort of like a little bit of a tax for running the war machines. They're good, but you don't need to index too heavily into them. So with all that said and done, what is the budget version that I would be going for? Well, I've picked up here the General of the Empire on the Imperial Griffon. I've gone for the Dragon Bow, as mentioned. Having an extra pseudo war machine is quite nice to have. You've got the white cloak, so you're relatively tanky with your full plate armor and your shield. The guy on top's not going to hit very hard, but gives a good leadership buff, and the Griffon itself hits a reasonable, it's reasonable in combat. We've got a single Empire Engineer. I think having one is really important just to get those rerolls. You really don't want those war machines to be falling over. And then I've gone for the double Wizard Lord. I've assumed that I've picked up the Collegiate Arcana box set because I have, and I'm making 2 wizards out of it. Just a great use of points. We're looking at 400 points there for £28. Can't argue with that. Into core, I've gone with the box of 2 Empire Archers. The reason I've gone for this is the Archers can go into skirmish. It's just a lot easier for me to move my wizards around relatively safely while still having good line of sight instead of being sat in a ranked up unit with crossbows that wants to stay still. But again, your mileage may vary. You can go for the slightly more expensive box of the missile troops, and that is super reasonable as well. I went with a big brick of the Knights of the White Wolf. I am a sucker for a big heavy hitting unit of cavalry. 8 is absolutely fine. Maybe it would be better to go for 8 here and then go for 4 that don't have an upgrade and are just, stubborn and running around doing things. But I like a big unit, so that's where I'm going with that. Onto the special, I've got the unit, or 2 great cannons. Obviously, 1 box makes 2, and I've got 2 Hellblaster Volleyguns in rare as well. And then the box of Outriders / Pistoliers, we've made a unit of the Road Wardens. The Road Wardens, we've gone for, upgrade for champion and musician. In fact, we've gone for that in both of them, just we had some spare points. The sharpshooter in the Outriders has got a grenade launching blunderbuss. I did a little bit of maths on that. It's just almost always, in fact, I think it's always the best gun. You've got a better ballistic skill. If you hit, it turns that hit into D3 plus 1 hits, which is just a better multi-shot gun because you don't take the multi-shot penalty. And then the Empire Road Warden, again, just had a few spare points, so we upgraded him to have the repeater pistol because 1 more shot, why not? It's a better ballistic skill. And I think this is a really solid way to build the list. This is a good mixed combined arms. You've got some fast units, you've got some stationary units, you've got some shooting, you've got some reasonable heavy hitters. It's hard to argue that this is anything other than a fairly middle-of-the-road, balanced Grand Army list. Speaking of engineers, there is coming up on pre-order this weekend, the Volleygun. Now, it's a made-to-order kit. I'm not expecting it to be a super budget purchase. However, if the reason you're getting into Empire is that you really want this model, given that it's made to order, I would assume it comes back at some point, but it might not be for a couple of years. I don't know when it could be. They haven't said anything about it. So it is one of those that you should probably pick up while you have the chance if part of the reason you're playing Empire is specifically for the Volleygun, because it is going to go away. As I've alluded to previously, if you've got access to 3D printing, or if you want to convert one up, that's going to be a much cheaper way of doing it. But, sometimes maybe the savings that you make by buying third party instead of going direct to Games Workshop, maybe that's what funds the Volleygun, because it's probably not going to be cheap, but it is a pretty model, so I will be thinking about getting one of those when it comes up on Sunday. Alternatively, let's say that you did buy the Battalion box. Super fine, we can use the stuff in there. Maybe we're not going to use all of it. I'm not super wowed by the melee infantry, I will say. However, we can take 2 uses or 2 units out of it. I think that'll give you some good value there. So in terms of the core, we've changed it over to the state missile troops. Obviously they come in the box, and that has changed how we're going to set our characters up. And then down here in rare as well, instead of the double Hellblaster Volleygun, we've gone for a steam tank. Now that is 25 points more expensive than the Hellblaster Volleygun, but we've changed the characters up as well. And feel free to run the characters in any way that you like. I just quite like this as a loadout. So we've still got a single level 4. I've gone for Battle Magic with a Lore Familiar. So we're going to be picking our spells. We're going to be throwing them from long range. Honestly, giving him the upgrade as well. I believe it's called a Wizard Staff down here at the bottom. Yes, a Wizard Staff for 20 points. You'd be getting +1 to cast on the assailant on magic missiles, so your Fireball will be casting it +1. If you've got 20 points to spare, that's not a bad use. Or throwing in a Ruby Ring of Rune, both of those are pretty solid. But this is more about getting the bare bones in. The General, we've taken off the Dragon Bow just because I was a little short on points. And then we've added in an Engineer on Volleygun. And the reason for that is it's a very similar sort of points to the Wizard. However, I don't really want to run a second Wizard because I've only got 1 infantry unit to bunker them in. So that feels like a lot of eggs in one basket. You don't have to put a Volleygun in. However, if you did have a battalion and really wanted a Volleygun, maybe this is the way that you would go. So that takes us to the end. My first suggestion, the list there, totting it up, does come in at under £250 for a full 2,000 point army, which I think is pretty solid by Warhammer standards. But even if you went with the second one, it still comes in, I think, at under £300. So relatively reasonable if you wanted to go down that sort of route. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you've bought, what you're looking at buying now that we've seen all of the models. You know, we've got the last pre-orders coming out this weekend as well. I'm excited to see more Empire on the table. I think they're one of the really fun armies, and I always enjoy playing against them. So let me know what you're bringing. Have a good one. Thank you for watching. Thank you for getting to the end of the video. If you've reached this point and you haven't already, I would really appreciate a like, a comment, a subscription if you haven't done those things. It just helps me get seen by more people, boost me up in the algorithm, all of the stuff that the YouTubers do like to say. If you would like to support me in my goal to become a full-time YouTuber, I would absolutely appreciate that. You can become a member below. There are various perks to those, name at the end of the videos, all that good stuff, but it also unlocks some VIP areas in Discord if you become a Longbeard or Ground Knight tier supporter. Those VIP sections are the only parts that are locked away in Discord. You don't have to be a member to join the Discord. I'd recommend that you should. We've got about 450, 500 people on there. It's a great place for discussion, a lot of fun. I do try and chime in as much as possible. And it's also where the Fix My List show lists are put, and also if you are one of the Ground Knight or Longbeard tier supporters, where you participate in choosing which list I play in the monthly Pick My List series.